Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this WISE debate, Remote Areas Expanding Access. I'm going to be your moderator for this afternoon's discussion. My name is Frida Wolfenden. I'm an academic at the Open University in the UK, where I work on teacher education, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. I've been working on the TESA programme, Teacher Education Sub-Saharan Africa, for several years, working to improve the quality and access to teacher education. Before inviting our four panellists to introduce themselves, I'm just going to say a few words about how we're going to organise the discussion this afternoon and give a few words of introduction to frame our discussion. We're going to be exploring different aspects of our topic, expanding access to learning in remote areas. And at various points during that discussion, I'd really like to invite you, the audience, to join the discussion, either through asking questions here in the auditorium or through posting your questions on Twitter. I think the hashtag is up there on the screen. So please do use that, but please also switch your phones to silent. And you may need a headset if you don't have one. And when you ask a question, please can you ensure that you try and make your question brief, maybe no more than a minute, and you might like to indicate which member of the panel you want to address your question to. So, to our discussion. We heard an awful lot this morning about 61 million children who are not currently accessing primary school. Many of those children live in rural areas. In some countries, over half the children who are not in school are located in rural areas. But this afternoon, we're not just going to focus on primary school aged children or children who haven't had access to the first steps of schooling, but maybe also think about children going to secondary school. There are also 71 million children of lower secondary school age who are not accessing schooling. And there are many more young people who would like to go to university, who would like vocational and technical education, who are currently unable to access opportunities for that sort of education. And I think we also mustn't forget the over 700 million people in the world who currently do not have literacy skills. One of the projects that you'll hear about this afternoon focuses very much on literacy skills. So why are all these issues much more pronounced in remote areas? Well, it's often much more expensive to take education opportunities to people in remote areas. Often there are few schools, often it's too far for children to walk to school. Teachers are very reluctant to go and work in remote areas. They might not speak the local language in that particular area. The curriculum might not seem relevant to the learners there. Resources are limited, little access to texts, so very little encouragement to become literate, and little access to networks and professional development opportunities for teachers and other adults who might be supporting learning. And of course, there are other marginalised communities who have very little access to education, who might be living in more urban areas, perhaps those from minority ethnic groups, those with disabilities, and women. But this afternoon, I don't want to focus really on the problems, but perhaps focus a bit more on some of the ideas, some of the possibilities for moving forward and giving these members of the global community access to education. There are initiatives and programmes which are showing promise, and a very common feature of many of these programmes is that they're harnessing new technologies. Not necessarily cutting-edge technology, like the sort of thing that we've got here in the WISE conference, but perhaps old technologies like radio. There are some fantastic examples, particularly from Latin America, of using radio to improve learning for children in primary schools. But there may also be opportunities to use much more modern technologies like mobile phones and tablets. So in our debate today, we're going to be asking our panellists to analyse their experiences of the benefits and the current limits of using these kind of technologies in a range of contexts. What sort of content do they use? What's the language of this content? How easy is it to adapt, to access? And then what happens to the role of the teacher when you have some of these technologies? I'm sure many of you read recently about a project in Ethiopia where children without a teacher were shown to have literacy gains when they've been given preloaded tablets to play with, but they managed to teach themselves some small literacy. So, but are there such projects sustainable, scalable? And how can we use technologies to enhance strategies that we know can be effective? Locally trained teachers, mentors, bursaries, and flexible language policies. These are some of the issues that we hope to explore in the next hour or so with the panellists and with your input. So I'd now like to invite the panellists to introduce themselves. So perhaps we could start, Mr. Sharma.
Good afternoon. I'm Chetan Sharma from Data Mission Foundation. A lot of work that we have done has been with working with the young people, young girls in particular, who dropped out of the schooling system, formal schooling system, and we have made an effort to link them back to the education with the help of certain training modules as well as on the skills building initiatives. And we have reached out to more than 18,000 plus young women in various parts of India so far. Thanks.
I'm Saul Nassé. I'm the controller of BBC Learning. The BBC, Britain's foremost public service broadcaster, funded by a licence fee. It has at its heart a desire to educate. Our mission is to inform, educate and entertain. So my job as the controller of the education department is to make sure the BBC lives up to that. So right across all of our channels, all of our radio networks and increasingly online, we've got a mission to educate. I commission and produce a wide range of material from informal learning through to formal learning. None of it with a specific focus on rural areas, but in serving all our audiences, we serve people in Britain who are the furthest away from London as much as those who are in the heart of the capital.
Thank you. Dr. Islam.
Good afternoon. This is Shafiqul Islam, Director of BRAC Education Program. BRAC Education Program currently operates 38,000 primary and pre-primary schools, which are mostly second chance, to more than 1 million children across the country. BRAC Education also extends support to the government to improve the quality of education at the secondary schools through capacity building of teachers, in-service teachers training, and also organizing students around the quality of education and making the classrooms more engaging and learning. The education program also operates a pretty large adolescent development program, which offers services to the adolescent through life skill training as well as livelihood training. This more often we call a Center for the Girls across the country, which can be referred also as a girls' club. BRAC has one of the largest library systems in Bangladesh, which is a rural library network. We operate now 2,500 rural libraries, which in the daytime is a school library essentially, and in the afternoon it is open to the community. In the afternoon, these are also open to the youth for livelihood and ICT training. So in brief, this is the education program. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pedro?
Thank you very much. My name is Frances Pedro, and I'm representing here UNESCO. As some of you may know, UNESCO has been doing a lot of work in relation to rural education in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. We have even a dedicated institute to rural education. But the reason I'm here is just to share with you some interesting projects and findings in the area of mobile learning. And I would like to use this opportunity to share with you what UNESCO is currently piloting in the area of using mobile learning for remote areas, particularly with a view of supporting teachers, contributing to literacy programs, and finally, empowering women and young girls. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and welcome to all the panelists. So I'd like to start our discussion this afternoon by looking at some of the different approaches which have been used to extend learning opportunities for pupils in rural areas. And I'd like to start with Dr. Islam and your work at BRAC. I know that inclusion is one of your 3 key characteristics, and we've heard a lot in the plenary sessions about how BRAC put the pupil at the centre of the learning experience. I also know that you've implemented a number of strategies to give access to quality learning opportunities for learners in rural areas. So can you share with us some features of these projects? What resources you use in these particular approaches?
I would be starting with the last one. BRAC schools, that 38,000 schools, whether pre-primary and primary we speak, is a very similar approach. The schools are substantially draws on the community. When I say that substantially draws on the community, what are the kind of factors that we draw? First of all, it is the teacher. A teacher is a local lady recruited from the local community. Number 2, definitely the learners. Learners come from a very small community, and since Bangladesh is a densely populated country, so job becomes easier to organize the learners. A BRAC school, it is a one-room kind of institution, so we cater to 32, 33 children in a single school. So the teacher-student ratio immediately is a 1 to 30. The third is a very engaging parent involvement. Right at the beginning, before we start the school, we would be entering into dialogue with the local community that what are our expectations from the community and what community can expect from us. So this is the demand and supply on both sides. And one of the commitments that we expect from the community that the parents should be monthly meeting and asking for a report card from the teacher. So it's an accountability process. And by that way, we also become accountable to the local community. Now, we do not construct any premises to start a school. It's a typical rural house that we take in as a rental form. Right at the beginning, if needed, we do some repairing and construction. But subsequent construction, if needed, for any reason, that has to be done by the local community. More importantly, 2/3 of the student body are girls. Subsequently, creating an enabling environment is fundamentally important. And that is a responsibility that is again given to the local community. So these are the kind of context in which the BRAC school operates. Teaching learning within the school is learning friendly, and we can also call it a very child-centered. So when we say that it is a child-centered, what does it mean? Essentially, the children are visible in the classroom. So the teacher's attitude towards the classroom is changed through the basic training of the teachers. So when teachers are brought into the training session, a few things are being communicated. One is the perception about the children. So perception about the children is an individual. The moment we say that children is an individual, we assume that children knows. So it's not necessarily that the teacher is the only one who knows everything. But at the same time, it's a team. Children and the teacher would be working in a team. So that's the most fundamental one. The third, to make the children visible in the classroom, we have to have certain methods, certain methodology. We organize them into group works. In fact, whole school is divided into five groups. In each group, around 6. And most of the activities would be taking place in group. And then when needed, it be organized through peer, one-to-one. And of course, there are role play through which children become, again, visible. Now, the reason I call that it is a teamwork, when the children are in the group work, the teacher would be moving from group to group and trying to understand that whether the group work really works. Because putting 6 children in a group, it does not automatically mean that it works. And here the teacher skills come, that how to make these group works working. And the moment we put the children in the group work, the typical classroom is changed. Because a typical classroom, more of a kind of audience shape. And since the teacher come from the same community and essentially a lady, and 2/3 of our student body are girls, so there is a new kind of synthesis within the classroom. Children feel very comfortable because it is she, a motherly, an elderly, a sisterly. This is one. The other thing also from the kind of teacher side, and I'll come back to it later on after some further discussion. It is very empowering for the teacher to become a teacher in the bracket school system. The moment she joins the bracket school, she feels empowered, and this has an impact on the classroom teaching learning. She does everything so that teaching learning takes place. So the teacher's development is fundamentally an important element so that it keeps goes on working. So for the time being, I'll finish and get back later on. Thank you.
No, that was very comprehensive, and I think the kind of key points there to draw out in the BRAC model is there's very much an emphasis on drawing on the resources that are there in the village, in the community. The resources are to become the teacher and also the pupils to support each other in the classroom. Perhaps, Mr. Sharma, we could move on to talk a little bit about your work, which is focused on, I think, much more older learners, as you said, perhaps people who've dropped out of school, who haven't gained basic literacy. So what was your starting point?
Our starting point was, again, similar to BRAC model, a very community-intensive immersion model. But the community immersion model engaged not only just the families of the girls and the youth who had dropped out of the schools, but also the clergy. For example, in many of the Islamic communities that we work, there has been some traditional resistance for the girls getting engaged in the educational process, and more importantly, processes that were, and also with certain topics of the content and the curriculum. So therefore, we've believed that it is very important for us to engage with the clergy, with the government, with the local government officials, particularly those of the education department, because they are the ones who are responsible for giving whole set of benefits for the learners, the uniform, the textbooks, the midday meal, etc. But apart from the consultative stakeholder process, what we thought was very useful was to conduct a thorough baseline study, a baseline survey linked to the social mobilization. So our mobilizer would go home to home, talking to these to the parents, to the community member, trying to identify the reasons why the girl had dropped out of school. And every girl is a different history. I mean, there could be someone who has dropped out of school because she didn't feel comfortable studying math or English or sciences. She could have dropped out because she wasn't comfortable, because in the school there was no separate toilet for girls. There could be a variety of reasons, or the majority of the girls said that we found the school atmosphere and the teacher very, very intimidating. We didn't find it friendly enough. We didn't find the content and the language that was being used was in the language and in the idiom which we are more comfortable at home. So the teacher had not taken the effort to synthesize the textbook and the content that were available and making it localized and locally available to the learning participants. So these were some of the methods that we followed in the preparatory process. And the integration, the database that was created was extremely important planning tool with respect to the mobilization, as well as ensuring the subsequent impartation of the training, the skills building process, as well as the certification and accreditation process.
So your skills training, where did that take place then? Once you've done this study and you've worked out what the areas are of need and so on, you've then instigated some skills training.
Yes.
Where did that take place and who led that?
It took place within the community multimedia center. These are a formal brick and mortar and informal learning center that is set up right up in the community. And we started initially with the help of UNESCO. In fact, we have a colleague, a senior colleague from UNESCO Paris, who was instrumental in guiding us, Dr. Khan, in the audience. I want to thank Dr. Khan and UNESCO in particular for seeing this initiative early enough and supporting us and strengthening our work. But we realized subsequently that we wanted to make it low-cost, scalable, and effective model, and very similar to what BRAC has said. In the rural areas, in the other places, we find there is a multiplicity of government buildings. There are also abandoned school buildings. So we didn't find any necessity to set up a formal brick or mortar structure. We just approach and engage them. That was our way of engaging the community. In some villages or in urban areas, we even took some homes of the families. We said, give us 2-3 homes. 2-3 rooms within your homes where we could set up the learning center. The learning center, I'm sorry to take too much of your time, but we have a lot more to share. Within the learning center, we of course had the conventional method of chalk and walk, but courtesy UNESCO and the integration of the open distance learning that we integrated, the computer and the ICT-enabled learning which we developed. Computers were there, we had plotters, digitizers, we had a whole lot of ICT tools. So that constituted a learning center.
Great, thank you. I wonder if Dr. Pedro would like to come in here and just mention, maybe there are any examples of projects that you know about which haven't been fortunate enough to have multimedia centers. Are there any ways in which we can support those communities?
Well, this is, I mean, of course we have done some work with the creation of multimedia centers, but I would say that increasingly we tend to look at the use of technology in remote areas using what we would call the comfort zone approach, meaning by that we tend to use increasingly the kind of technologies that are not foreign, so to say, to the context in which we are expected to operate. In fact, I would like to use the opportunity just to mention maybe 3 principles according to which we develop our current operations in mobile learning. First, I mean, of course, what I'm going to say is already well known by everyone, but I think it's important for people working in education to remind ourselves that when dealing with the issues in remote areas, education is key, but it cannot solve everything. So the best approach is the one that has concerted actions which involve not only, you know, a range of organizations and NGOs and local communities, but actually those that look at education under the wider perspective of what are the issues at stake in one particular community, which in some cases might be extremely related to health, in other cases could be simply related to gender issues or economic issues. You know, we have to look at that. So that's the first principle. The second principle is this idea of as much as we can, we have to use the opportunities of existing technologies. And I would like to mention just a kind of a surprising figure, which is that in sub-Saharan Africa, there are more cell phones than toilets. And if you look at many secondary school teachers in sub-Saharan Africa, you will realize immediately that they have a cell phone in their pocket. In fact, in some countries, secondary school teachers in Africa are considered to be, by telecom companies, in the premium segment of customers. So this is surprising. Now, does it mean that they use these cell phones, you know, for any learning-related purposes? Not necessarily. But what UNESCO has already realized is that there is a potential, because believe it or not, particularly for teachers working in remote areas, even if there are other issues at stake, like the fact that many of them are para-teachers, non-qualified teachers, I mean, that they need support. At least if we use the window of opportunity that is already in their pockets, there is a lot that can be achieved. So we can really get to them and, more importantly, contribute to the creation of communities of teachers and learners, just using very simple and cheap technologies. So I think that this is the second principle. And finally, the third one is that although we place a lot of emphasis on literacy, particularly, which is a key issue in most remote areas, we also are increasingly convinced that we shouldn't address literacy issues in an isolated way. So the more, and I think we're going to talk about, for instance, the work we do with some women or young girls. I mean, the more we work with them, the more we tend to realize, as many other people here in the audience, I assume, that it's important that literacy, helps people to address daily problems. And it might well be that the first problem is related to subsistence. So in which way the kind of literacy that we are providing or helping people to acquire is really addressing not literacy needs, but actually subsistence needs. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think actually that's a very neat segue there, actually back to Mr. Sharma and your project, because I think there you've addressed ideas of functional literacies, haven't you, for women in your project, in order to be generating income through acquiring skills to perhaps sell some of their goods online. Mr. Sharma, would you like to share a little bit about the kind of literacies that you've developed in your project?
Yes, I completely agree with what Dr. Pedro has just said. Functional literacy, by way of which a person, and a woman in particular, is able to lead her day-to-day life and further contribute to the sustainability of her family as a unit, I think is extremely important. There is a huge pressure on the women in urban areas as well as in the rural areas, even in countries such as India, which present a very, very divided. I mean, there's one section which is obviously advanced, and there the technologies are, they're the big technology companies. But the larger part of the country has completely laggarded behind. Yet, there's huge pressure amongst the women to step out of their homes and contribute that extra money to the household kitty. How does one do that? So breaking and the school dropout are mostly neo-literate or semi-literate. They are not even able to decipher the alphabets or the numbers. So, and it is not just, English is in fact is a tall order, but even in our local Indian languages, be it in Hindi or in Urdu to some extent, which is predominantly used to be and still continues to remain in larger parts of the Islamic community, the language which is understood. So imparting them fast-track literacy module by which they are able to decipher and understand those alphabet, get them to do simple, basic, day-to-day productive calculations and mathematics. Because even if you have a woman who may just go out on and sell something, she needs to know what is she selling and how much has she purchased for her to work as a trader, as an informal sector trader. This was one thing we were very clear. Number two is that every woman in particular has some or the other innate design skills. I mean, universally you find it, in fact, in our homes in rural areas, as well as in urban area, you'll find women doing some kind of painting outside the door, and they would do a multitude of colors or on the fabrics and all that. But sadly, the control of the design in the trade and in the informal sector is always with the men. The men would never allow the design to go out into the hands of the women. So that's where, again, with the help of Indian Institute of Technology and the World Bank, we brought a technology-enabled solution that gave women an opportunity to make their own design on the computers. So they were doing mix and match. They were mixing and dropping some of the modules and the motifs. And why the man was controlling this? Because the mold, and you take a fabric on which the mold is, that is extremely heavy. So we made a very light, gender-friendly tool, mold, that allowed the women to put it on the cloth, and once she had the cloth, they were able to embroider, and they were able to sell it in their shops. And apart from this, the design skills, the computer-aided design contributed to a whole lot of these. You may want to check on our website, datamissionfoundation.org, and on the related sites. So these were the income generation skills. Further taking the guidance from UNESCO and other colleagues, that it was not just you had the entry-level trades. We have seen, and the sector, though were extremely large, tailoring or cutting, handicraft is not large enough for all women to find a place in the economic space. So, and we didn't want to relate them and engage them only in the stereotype profession. A woman who has gained functional literacy she's in a position to work in a mall. She's in a position to work as a computer operator. So we gave the basic ICT knowledge on some of those modules as well. And I'm very proud to say that we had a placement rate from a UNESCO project and from others over 55%. So over 55% of the women that went through this process were either placed in a 9-to-5 job or were enabled by setting up of a micro-enterprise.
Great, thank you. It's a really good example of using education opportunity to lead to a pathway towards employment or other opportunities. So in that little story that you've been telling us, you talked about people using online content. So I'd like to just kind of shift a little bit now to the BBC, who are obviously incredibly well known for developing a huge amount of content, lots of which is broadcast, but there's also increasing amount online. So Saul,
yeah, I mean,
talk to us about.
If I think back to my childhood when I was at school, what you got in terms of educational media was schools television. That's what the BBC did. BBC got very early into online and started finding ways of building interactivity into what we do for pupils and for teachers back in the 90s. And it's been something that's been incredibly fertile for us. And we've got something called Bite Size, which is a revision website for children that has got incredible reach. It's got something like 85% reach at age 16. So there are people right across the country using all of that. But I think something we've started to twig just in the last 2 or 3 years is that it's not just that the distribution channel for educational content has changed. It's actually that the wiring of our audience's brains is starting to change. The generation we're now talking to in schools, whether they're rural or urban, is a generation of digital natives. I see that with my own daughter. I've got a daughter who turned 3 on Saturday. She doesn't watch television. She watches a lot of video, and she watches it on the iPad that I supposedly bought for myself and I now can't get out of her hands. And she loves it because compared with the television, it delivers everything to her there and then. She goes to the TV, she thinks it's broken because she can't touch it and move things around. She thinks it's broken because it's got a schedule and the program that's on is the program that's on, not the one that she chooses. And I think if you look at children in societies where there is this huge amount of online activity, they are now completely digital. And I think that's having an interesting impact in rural communities, because with the ability of social networks to start connecting people up, the fact that someone is geographically isolated starts to become less and less important. I wanted to really take a close look at this, and because I've got them, I sent a team of my producers out to a really rural part of the UK just to see how these new technologies are starting to be used by kids who are digitally native. So we've just got a quick film, if we could show that, and we can have a think about what's going on.
I moved to Mal about a year ago and I really love living here.
I live in like a really remote place. I'm like the only person my age who lives there. We have 1 or 2 come from the mainland.
Which is quite an exciting journey for some of them.
There are 1 or 2 come across from Kilhone and the outlying areas of Lochalan. It's quite a large geographical area.
Children live on the island of Ulva. There's more sheep and deer than humans, so school is the centre of the social life.
In the past, it was books that were supplied in the school. Nowadays, most of them have access to the internet, which has changed things dramatically.
It's been a lot easier to do studying since we got the school laptops and everyone gets their own account and you can log on and everyone at different levels can do different things on the internet.
I don't really like writing things out on paper. I'm a bit lazy that way. So whenever we get to use computers in a lesson, I'm just like, yay, it's going to be a good lesson.
If you get a pupil who is off long term, they have access to everything that I use in the classroom.
Even if they're off, whether it's just because of remoteness, even sickness, they can keep up to date with what's happening within the class. They do have social education lessons where some of the resources will not be just MUL-based resources, they are wider issues.
For my senior kids, I use a thing called Scholar. They can access lecturers from Heriot-Watt University who can offer assistance. One of the difficulties we have here when kids go to college and university is they get homesick very easily. To be in touch with home on a more regular basis rather than a phone call, I'm talking about things here like Facebook and Twitter, and the kids here use all the time.
I have friends who live in places like Sheffield and I can communicate with them through email and Facebook.
I use Skype and stuff like that to communicate with my friends from my old school.
If they were to take the computers away, I would probably end up Skyping off school quite often.
I would not get the opportunity to talk to my friends, and I also would not get the opportunity to do things at school.
You might not have the certain books. You might have to go off the island to get them.
The library still exists, and it's not any smaller than it used to be. But in the library now, we have a trolley full of, I don't know if it's 20 laptops that the kids can access that, not just being restricted to being living in the very rural place we do.
So it's interesting there. I think you're starting to see a school that 30 years ago would have been very, very different from the kind of school that would be in an urban setting, starting to become more and more like every other school because it's one that's packed with IT. The sorts of experiences the children are having are the same as their colleagues down in an urban place would be.
So actually, I'd just like to kind of pause here and take one of the questions that's come through on Twitter, because I think that's very relevant to this kind of part of the discussion. I think maybe, Dr. Pedro, this might be a good question for you. A question is, how can digitally illiterate teachers be persuaded to take digital learning on board? So how do we move the teacher, might be the teacher in that particular school, to the place they're at now from somewhere else pre-digital?
Yeah, thank you. Frankly, this is a very important question. And I think that the first element that we have to consider is the relevance of the kind of support or training that we are offering. So people don't mind to try new things, provided that the reward in terms of the benefits they get from using these new tools are really commensurate to the effort they are requested to make. That's why I started the conversation talking about the comfort zone, meaning by that people find much easier to start working with what we call new technologies for learning if we start by technologies which are already in their local context. So it might well be that in the rural areas where they live, they have already some TV sets, for instance, and certainly some cell phones. Okay, we have been able, we and other partners, including, for instance, Nokia, as well as some ministries in education, have been able to use those, I would say, not necessarily very modern technologies, in a way that really provides access to school children to digital materials, just combining, not really the cell phone as a phone, but rather the cell phone as a transporter for some digital content. And I would like to use this opportunity also to stress the importance that precisely when we are dealing with remote areas in the least developed countries, that we have to place on the openness of the educational materials that we are either using or creating. I think that this is an added value, particularly when we are, just aiming at this kind of contribution.
Thank you.
Can I add something there?
Yes,
that's a place, I think, where we as a broadcaster in the UK are really advantaged. I say to my team, don't think of teachers as if they're some sort of separate breed of alien that only teaches. They're people that we reach as a broadcaster all the time, who spend some of their time teaching. So we're able, in what we do in general entertainment broadcasting, to start to shift teachers into a digital space because they're watching their favourite soap on demand, or they're catching up with the news on their phone. So it's in a way sometimes easier to shift people in their social life digitally, and then use the skills that they've acquired there in the professional context of when they're teaching.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. It's back to Dr. Pedro's idea, isn't it, of the comfort zone, of starting where people feel comfortable. But I also just wanted to pick up on your point about openness. I think back to what some colleagues were saying earlier about the importance of content, of texts and so on, being in local languages. And so if content is open, then people have the potential to adapt it to particular contexts, maybe to change the language that it's in. And I know that increasingly that's becoming easier with digital content. If anybody wants to comment on the idea of openness. I'd like to, are there any questions for the panel at this particular point in the debate from the audience? Yes. Perhaps could you just stand up and say who you are before you give us your question? Thank you.
I'm Minaz Ansar Khan from Pakistan. I work for the Dhaka Hassaniya Mission in Pakistan. Taking all the discussion, it's been very helpful, insightful, but I'd also like your opinion with regard to areas that are very far-flung, hilly, mountainous, where we can't consider mobile phones because of signal issues there. In our case, we have gone into such areas, and then we finally did resort to using simple television, DVDs, providing them, with material that way. But even then, it's very challenging to ensure quality because you have, you can't find the right trained people. You don't have enough resources often to spend as much on training, though you'd really like to. Because in such areas, you require very constant interventions. They're not used to the new way of teaching, learning, activity-oriented approaches. So even with respect to vocational education, I agree some of these areas have some of the most talented women with a natural aptitude towards designing. But then you also have to give them some exposure to what the design demands are in the market, or how they can create or change their designs in such a way that they might even create market needs, in the market. And this is a purely business approach, but it becomes very difficult often to reach that sort of target in these kinds of areas. If you have any examples of such areas and best practices, would be very helpful if you can share those. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Would you like to comment on your experience?
I would like to partly contribute to this. Now, technology is definitely a phase changing of education. This is the bottom line that we have to understand. Now, how we customize this whole technology is a different really question. That would be depending on definitely on the resources available. I would be giving an example that we are doing in BRAC. For the high school level, what we did, we put the entire textbook in an animated textbook form. The whole objective is that it can be put in a DVD format, and when needed, the teacher can use it in the classroom as a supplementary tool. When the classes are over, If the students want, it can be a self-learning tool. So this way, what we could do, achieving two objectives. One, introducing the technology, because itself is really very engaging. Itself, it creates a kind of very positive attitude among the children, and there is an attraction in the whole technology. The second, if you design this whole software in an interactive way, so that not necessarily they need a large classroom. The 2-3 children can sit down, they can play while they are answering the certain questions on a lesson. It can be also a bit of relaxing. So the tension that one experiences in the classroom can be relieved by developing those softwares. The third is, as I mentioned, it can be an off-hour learning for the children, along with the parents, if that really there is an opportunity. If parents have certain amount of literacy only, and the children can share it with the parents, this can be a wonderful kind of learning tool. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just follow up, though, because I think the question was also asking about how you maybe provided ongoing support to this. I'm kind of imagining a village in a very mountainous area, which is quite difficult to get to, where there's no, maybe you were commenting, no mobile phone signal. So how do you provide support? Sometimes software doesn't work, people become disappointed with it. Do you have any thoughts on how do you keep on supporting, keep motivating people to be using it?
No, I would like to start by reminding ourselves, well, first of all, that the situation that the contributor has described is a very real one, and I think that the kind of experiences that we have described so far, I mean, tend to, address the needs of remote areas, which are, I would say, reachable, so to say. And she was describing certainly really remote areas. Now, I would like to just make a point about the necessarily policy environment that we need, because just coming back to the excellent film that the BBC has shared with us, I mean, you certainly realize, no matter what the scale of development of that particular country we have seen, that there is a kind of a policy ambition and willingness, to serve in a way of compensating for the fact that, these people are living in very isolated, remote areas. Now, when it comes to developing countries, we have to remind ourselves that there is a public responsibility. And there is, of course, you can, make your accounting and decide that in the end it's not worth, investing in those remote areas. Well, that's the responsibility of the government. But we have to remind ourselves that the more we invest in those who have less, the better the country will be benefiting from that. So I think that it was said yesterday, I mean, the more we invest at the bottom, the best for the whole system. So I think that this is something that we have. So just let me insist on this plea for the appropriate policy environment and remind ourselves that public policies have to be designed to deal with those particular remote areas. Now, having said that, I don't think that there is a magic bullet, something like, a kind of a one-size-fits-all type of solution. I haven't seen, I mean, any surprising solution implemented in those particular areas. What I have to say, I would like to insist once again that when we talk about cell phones, we shouldn't be paying attention to the fact that they are part of a network, because sometimes, and it's quite often in many countries, they don't work. Okay? But still, we have a powerful digital device, which can be used to transport digital content. Now, of course, people have to move. I mean, if there are no networks, people have to move, or at least the cell phones have to move. Okay? But there are ways to organize that.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think that's one practical solution about using the cell phone as a device in itself, even though it might not always be connected. And I know that actually my own university has been involved in a project which has been doing that in Bangladesh, where they've been putting video content on phones, which has been used by people in very, very remote areas. So there are ways forward, but I think, as a colleague said, no magic bullets for that. Did you want to?
I was going to throw something in. I just wondered, if I think of the armory of content that I've got available as a broadcaster, whether something like DTH satellite could work in that environment, because you've got quite a cheap domestic way of receiving pictures over satellite. It reaches anywhere. It would take some investment in the content, but you could be getting certainly video content into anywhere in Pakistan if you put a bit more resource into it. There's rudimentary interactivity that you can build in as well. So that I think one of the lessons with emerging media is that not every innovation wipes out everything that's gone before. You want to still have old-fashioned radio up your sleeve. You want TV up your sleeve. You want connected red button. You want internet. You don't want to throw away all the old stuff because there's a place for all of it.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think that's a very powerful message, actually, that the range of tools that we've got is growing. It isn't. We're not replacing some with newer tools. There were several other people who wanted to ask questions, so perhaps if I could just take a couple more, and then the lady sitting in front of you. Yeah.
Thank you. This is a question for Dr. Islam about BRAC's program specifically, and BRAC has done such a wonderful job of scaling and reaching the hard to reach places, and I was wondering how you have focused on maintaining quality while you're scaling.
It's a challenge, no doubt. And quality, is I would not call it as a complex issue, but quality is a very important issue that deserves attention from the planner. So if we scale up, before scaling up, what we usually do in BRAC, we try to assess the kind of need of scaling up and the risk that we are holding. Risk is one area where the quality issue would be coming. Now, for quality, what I said in my earlier intervention, that the teamwork of teacher and student is one, which is very important. The second, for quality, we need the learning material. So quality education cannot be reached only through a few textbooks. I'm speaking mostly the developing countries situation. It has to go beyond the textbook. And beyond textbook means it can be, play material, it can be reading material, it can be speculating material. So in BRAC school, usually we provide a diverse materials on reading particularly. The third is again, I'm referring to the developing countries situation. Teacher needs support because we depend on the teachers who does not have a high level of education. Usually 10 to 12 years of schooling. So after 10 to 12 years of schooling, she has her own limit. So she has to be supported by the trainer, by her supervisors. So the supervisors are essentially calm trainers. They have to visit the classes, understand the classroom pedagogy, understand the challenges that the teacher face in the classroom. So when the teacher comes for monthly refreshers, because it's an inbuilt program in the BRAC system, one, teacher would be exchanging the views, experiences with the peer teacher. Two, the observations and the experiences that the trainer brought from the classroom would be really thrown to the teachers to discuss on those issues. And third, a very careful lesson planning is fundamentally important for any quality delivery in the classroom. Now, I do not know how it works, and it's in fact a question to my fellow panelists, or for that matter on the audience. If I really summarize the BRAC works in Bangladesh or in a few other developing countries, teachers are 10 to 12 years of schooling who has given a training from BRAC and work with full devotion, and one who enters into the classroom just can feel that an engaging classroom. Teacher really interact with the children. Teacher really knows every single child by name. Teacher knows who are the slow learner in which subject and what kind of treatment are needed. So you see a very active, engaging classroom. Now, without undermining any system, I have experience with the mainstream system, formal system, where teacher-student ratio is much larger. Teachers are much more qualified, have gone through the Masters of Education, Bachelor of Education courses. But when you enter into the classroom, you do not feel that vibration. You do not see the level of engagement. You do not see that teamwork is happening. So my question to the audience, how comes that a lady with 10 to 12 years of schooling is much more devoted to her own work and is capable to produce an engaging classroom? On the contrary, teachers with much higher level of education, we always do not see that vibration in the classroom. It might be a good research for the Oxford University to do in the coming years. Thank you. I do not know whether it qualifies you.
Well, I just want to respond to that and say that we do see some teachers. I personally have seen some fantastic practice in very large classrooms in Uganda, for example, or Kenya, where teachers are, where they have very positive relationships with the children, where they are understanding that those children are knowledgeable and they are listening to them and they are starting from where those children are at. But I would agree that's not true of all teachers. And it may be that there are some issues there around the nature of the training process and what's prioritized in it. And I can see that Dr. Pedro would love to get in and say something there.
I'm sorry. No. While I understand the point that both of you are making, I think that the best case scenario would be, one which addressed the question, how can we bring that kind of aspiration that you are describing to the mainstream system? Yes. Because it's not, I would say, for most teachers I know, I mean, it's not that they would like to stay as they are. They would like to, have clear set expectations, ambitions. They would like to progress professionally. They would like to get even more qualifications. No, the question for us is, what is in the system? What is in the working conditions that really, leads to that kind of unsatisfactory situation. So it's not to depreciate what you are describing, but rather, the question, excuse me, for those working with mainstream schools is how can we, improve that?
Exactly. I think how can we take lessons perhaps from some of the practices that you've engaged with? I think you talked about kind of lots of support for that teacher, and I think that's very critical, isn't it, for teachers to feel part of professional networks and to have access to opportunities. I know there was a colleague there very keen to ask a question. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Hilda Tadria from Uganda. I work with young girls in schools. And so I'm very interested in what you are saying. I've already had a discussion with Dr. Pedro, so I think I'll back up a bit on that. But one of my questions is, does any one of you track the possible inequalities that are likely to emerge with the use of IT? Talking from my perspective in Uganda, girls have less access because they are controlled not to communicate with telephones. Female-headed households, which I know in Uganda is about 33% in remote villages, who have no access to telephones, and therefore their children may not have access to IT-based communication. So my question is this something you're anticipating? That's one question. My second question especially is to BRAC, and I hope you won't mind me asking this. I want to know, how do the children who are taught by the people in the same village with that amount of education, how do they expand their worldview? Are there other interventions that you have in place to help expand their worldview? I'm assuming that's very important for every learner. And then finally, and I hope I'm not mistaken, I think that's the one which uses mothers in the community as teachers. And I'm wondering, does that have an impact on the way people see women as able to provide easy kind of support with little remuneration? Does that have an impact on working with women for less? I'm sorry, I hope these questions are not out of line. But talking from my perspective, in Uganda, those are the questions I would ask.
Great, thank you very much. Maybe we can just take those questions, sort of unravel them, take them in turn. So I think first of all you asked about use of technologies and whether we were seeing any inequalities arising from use of IT. You just talked about gender inequalities, but there could be other kinds of inequalities there as well, I think. I know that personally in the panel we've also talked about the use of language might also give rise to inequalities. Would anybody like to comment on the use of IT? So.
We measure it definitely in the UK because we get statistics back from who uses what, I mean, down to the person. And I have to say, in the UK, there isn't any obvious gender inequality, but I think that's probably to do with society rather than the technology. The one inequality we do see again, which reflects society, is when we look at our adult users of our children's content, very heavily skewed towards women, because it's mums who are helping the kids at home with the homework. So that's actually almost the gender inequality we need to do something about. If we can be encouraging dads to help their kids learn as much as mums and making the whole family learning thing be better, that's the one for us.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yes, please, of course.
Yeah, I would like to use this opportunity to continue the conversation that we had this morning, which was very interesting. But I think that there are some facts that we have to consider. Not knowing particularly the area where you are working, I have to say that Sub-Saharan Africa is the area in the world where mobile phone subscriptions have been rising more steadily in the past 5 years. And so, I mean, it might well be that, of course, you still perceive digital divides as we still see them in many other countries. But the speed of the changes that are taking place now in Africa when it comes to the adoption of mobile phones is really impressive. And we haven't seen this happening in any other region. So my forecast is that possibly in 3 years, if we see each other or continue communicating, we are going to change a little bit our appreciation of that. Now, but the digital divides will exist because when the women you have in mind have access to cell phones, I mean, the ones who have access now to those cell phones will have access to smartphones or tablets or whatever. So, your point is well taken. We have to pay attention to the digital divides. Now, the second point is about gender and technology. And I think that I have to say that from the perspective of UNESCO, and I would say of some other UN agencies, we try to avoid as much as we can to be involved in large-scale operations of massive distribution of technology. Because, I mean, that's not really the point. I mean, what we should be doing is to enable people, to empower people to use existing technologies, or at least accessible technologies. Now, one particular story I would like to share with you is the story about the bright pink phones. I don't know if you have heard about them, but it's a very famous project in Cambodia where women interested, in mobile learning, I would say, couldn't have access to mobile cells because of gender issues. So the cells existed in the family, but were owned only by, fathers or husbands and the like, and they wouldn't accept that their women have access to those cell phones. Now, we designed, well, it wasn't us, it was others, designed a project according to which a massive distribution of bright pink phones started. So just using, in a funny way, I think it's a very controversial approach, using in a funny way that kind of a stigma that in those particular communities, males have about, bright pink fonts. I mean, now, I think it's controversial because in a way, it's still stigmatizing, you know, the way in which technology appears in the hands of people, depending on gender issues. But certainly, and that's the point I wanted to make, thanks to this, there was a difference in the life of those women. And I think that's, you know, it's a battle where we see, you know, one step forward, and sometimes, you know, even at the price of doing a little bit, you know, awkward things.
Thank you. Yes, I think as a colleague said, that this is probably an area that we need to be monitoring. We do know that when technology was introduced into schools, for example, in the UK, initially there could be great inequalities in the way in which pupils had access to that. But then we have to think about strategies and tactics for giving groups that haven't got access to that technology. That's not necessarily a reason for not using it, but for being very aware of that and trying to work out how we can increase access for everybody. So perhaps we could just move a little bit now on to your other question, which was very much around the kind of BRACs, the teachers that BRAC uses, the drawing on the resources in the community. And I think if I can just paraphrase what you're saying is that by using women in the local community, you're worried that that's a kind of feminization of the profession, and then that leads to actually teaching becoming a lower status profession. And I'm sure we'd all agree that we want teaching very much to be regarded as a high status profession. We want people to enter teaching. We don't want it to be a profession of last resort. But I'm sure our colleagues here will give us examples of how perhaps these are starting points for women on a career track to becoming a fully accredited teacher, because it seems to me that's what we need to be thinking about, is how we can support the women who are working as local teachers in their villages to actually gain the qualifications to become equal in status to people who have had opportunities to go away to teacher training college. Perhaps you'd like to comment on how that might happen.
First of all, thank you for bringing out this whole issue. Selecting the teacher from the community does not mean that the teacher cannot have a worldwide exposure. One of the important elements that we have in our teachers training program, that teachers have a monthly refreshers, and every year they have to go through at least a week-long course. Now in Bangladesh, we started a new program in cooperation with the BRAC University, BRAC Institute of Language, since there is a high demand particularly for the English language. We started a 3-month-long course. You would not believe when these teachers go for training and interact with the BRAC University faculties, which is a private university and one of the top high-quality universities. They are definitely, open up to a new world. So you are absolutely correct that we have to be attentive to it, that unless their opportunities are created for a wider interaction, there can be pretty much of a local in terms of perception. Second, what we do, as I mentioned, that we really believe that learning materials play a fundamental important role in terms of quality education. And as part of that learning material, there is a monthly magazine which goes to every single BRAC school, and in sufficient number, not only for the teacher, so that even the students can access. And the third, fortunately, the whole of media, thanks to media, even a country like Bangladesh, even a country like Pakistan, where there are hilly conditions, the media can be accessed pretty much easily by most part of the country, and that is really connecting the local community to the rest of the world and to the rest of the country. So I fully agree that this is an important aspect that we have to keep in mind when we design the teachers' development packages. So interaction is a fundamentally important area. And the whole feminization issue, I fully agree with our moderator, Frederick. Think of the other alternative. What we had the long tradition, that teaching was a man profession. And the girls with 10, 12 years of schooling have no job, have no work. So would that be working as an incentive to the whole quality education and universalization of education, or would be working as a disincentive? Engaging girls, giving them a space in the society so that they can contribute and demonstrate. And the challenges really putting, for that matter, to the men that what they are capable of producing, and men have to think it now twice. I think it's not because that they are cheap. It is because they have potentials that they contribute, and they, as citizens of the country, deserve a space to demonstrate. And at least this is the way that we believe in BRAC and work in BRAC. Thank you.
Can I just clarify for that? Because I'm not as familiar with some of the... So you don't actually recruit men to be teachers in the BRAC schools? No. Sorry, can you use the mic?
Sorry, no plan to bring the men into the teaching kind of teaching group, because the women are doing a wonderful job and they need a space. That is very important to recognize. Why the family would be educating their girls if they do not have an employment, if they end up with unemployment?
Right.
That is not consistent to the whole concept of education for all. That is not consistent to the whole empowerment of women. But we have to be attentive that that is not being used wrongly. And BRAC has no plan to change this strategy. We are very happy with the women teachers. We will empower them further. We will connect them further to the, not only to the BRAC University, possible to other universities, but they will remain our frontline people who will make the learning happening in the classroom. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's good to be reassured that actually also this is not a kind of limiting factor. I think this is what the colleague here is saying, that I understand your point about parents sending their girls to school because they can see that there's a route for those girls to become teachers, but surely it's got to be more than just teachers. I mean, teaching is a very honourable profession, but it isn't the only thing that we're going to be educating girls for. So there must be other possibilities as well. So maybe we should also keep those kind of things in mind when we're constructing some of these projects. So that was one of the topics that was very much highlighted here, was the issue of gender. And one of the questions that I received here through the Twitter was actually around girls going to school and parents being reluctant, particularly in rural areas, to send their girls to school, and what kind of strategies could we employ to encourage parents to send their girls to school. Now, I know there have been many kind of successful initiatives in that area. I don't know, either perhaps if through BRAC or UNESCO or your own, actually, Mr. Sharma, if just any kind of ideas that we've got, perhaps we could have one idea each about encouraging parents to send girls to school or allowing girls to participate in education. Would you like to start?
Educating the mothers, educating the families, emphasizing and empowering them with regard to the importance of education in their lives. That was one strategy which we adopted. The second strategy that we have tried to adopt, I must say we've not been very successful. One of the reasons in the rural areas why parents don't want to send the girls to the school, because the girl is usually contributing to the household work, either in the household work or in the farm, or at the farm as a farm hand. So she would do all the work in the farming and all the other, or even in the communities like nomadic tribes, shepherds, she would rear the whatever work has to be done. So therefore, linking those families with the other income generation programs, where the family doesn't mind the girl going out of the home and going to the school, because they're seeing, so we have to work as a community organization actually pretty hard to ensure that every single girl goes there. So these are two things that we...
Thank you.
I would like to add, because this is a very important area. With enrollment in most part of the world now, more girls are in the classroom. But at the same time, we know from a number of studies that the girls' completion rate is one area that they are struggling. But as the girls move into the secondary education, it is even more kind of discriminatory. If you look into, at least from Bangladesh experience we can share, most girls do not study science for a number of reasons. most parents want their sons to study science, because the science would be opening up a career for medical, a career for engineering, a career for whatnot. But when you go for, we call it in our part is an arts, it's a very limiting for a career selection in the future. But the reason the parents do not really encourage the girls to take up science, because it requires higher level of family investment. Since teaching learning is not very effective always in the high schools, it has to be supplemented by the private tuition. And this is a very important area that we have to have a very specific strategy. Otherwise, this situation would not be changing very soon. So it will not automatically happen. Exactly, if we look into 20 years before, the number of girls going to school was far less than the number of boys. So it has changed because there were concrete steps, there were strategies, a wide range of interventions. So keeping girls in school would be requiring very specific strategy, concentrated efforts, both by the government and, of course, by the civil society and other the non-government organizations. This is a big area that we have to work. And if anything remain unachieved by 2015, that would be one area that girls still are in a disadvantaged position in most part of the developing countries compared to their boys counterparts. And this is not consistent for the development, for the globalized world that we are into.
No, but it is fairly common that girls are not completing primary school to the same extent as boys are and not progressing on to secondary education. So,
I would like to share a piece of information which is really interesting. I mean, when girls complete or achieve the same levels of education of boys, they tend to perform better. And that's, that's a good, rewarding news that is waiting for us at the very end of the road. Now, I would like to come back to the initial question of how to, deal with this imbalance. And I think that there are, I would say, mental barriers which are very difficult in some cases, in some communities, to address. And that's why the work that happens closer to families, and particularly to mothers, is so important. But at the same time, as colleagues have already mentioned, there are also financial and economic issues here. And we have seen in a number of countries, particularly countries that are already becoming middle-income countries, that they have been able to create incentives for families sending their children, and particularly girls, to schools. Okay, so that's one point. But it's not really, a solution that could be applied for everywhere. Now, at least, and I was having a discussion this morning with some other colleagues present here, at least if the kind of school provision that we offer to girls in particular has some kind of possibility of getting earnings, or at least oriented towards a possible, a possibility of earning, then families tend to look at that formal provision of education in a different way. But we have to demonstrate that this is really happening. And at the end of the day, families would like to see how much money that girl has earned. I'm sorry to be so, so practical and so pragmatic, but that's the way it is. So there are, again, mental barriers that are the most difficult to overcome. But at the same time, there are also economic and financial issues. And there are ways in which we can deal with that.
Thank you. Yes, I think we're running out of time here, actually, so I'm just going to take one more question.
You were going to have an idea from all four of us, and you've missed me out.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
Can I throw one in
yes,
quickly?
Yes, you can. Very quickly.
It's my equivalent to the pink phone.
Sorry.
Although, actually, in this case, it's a blue phone. The kind of idiocies of a developed country, we're now in a position in the UK where our problem is with boys. Boys' educational attainment dropping quite significantly below girls, particularly in literacy for young boys. Our equivalent to the pink phone was we looked across what the BBC had in terms of its big projects and thought, what do we have here that will attract young boys? And we've got a show called Doctor Who. It's been running for 50 years. It's my favourite show. It's a fantasy show. It really engages young boys. What we did was we put together a writing competition around Doctor Who. So we basically were putting together a whole series of lesson plans that let teachers teach young boys how to write a Doctor Who script. And it completely grabbed them, because suddenly they were doing something at school that felt like something they should be doing at home. And we saw kids who'd only ever written 6-word sentences before suddenly writing 15-word sentences in the most disadvantaged parts of the country. So you can... That's the thing you've got as a broadcaster. You can look at a problem, you can think of what solution you've got in your armoury, what appeals to particular demographics. It worked a treat for us.
No, sounds great. So maybe there are things that we can take that might kind of excite teachers to be working with girls. Because actually, we haven't got time to explore this, but I think there are also issues about what happens with girls when they're inside school. It isn't just about getting them into school. But I did promise that we could have one question. Have you got a mic? We could just have the lady in the middle at the first. And if your question is... actually, sorry, sir. It was just the colleague here first. If your question is very quick, we might have time for you. What? But can we just ask this lady to do hers first? Thanks.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Ellen Martinez, and I work for Save the Children, which is a global organization working on children's rights. And I thank the panel very much for your insights into actually delivering what is a very challenging task that we still have ahead in terms of guaranteeing that 61 million children get to school, hopefully by 2015, but if not, a few years later. Now, one thing that I'm missing in the panel is the government's voice in terms of the challenges within ministries of education to deliver education in remote areas as the ultimate duty bearers in the education equation and as their full responsibility. Now, I wonder to what extent can your initiatives also make sure that in replication and in the scaling up actually involve governments so as to for them to actually be the ultimate deliverers of your really successful interventions. Thank you, Chair.
Great. And I'm just going to allow a gentleman here to give his question, because you promised it's very quick. And
mine is not a question, it's information to colleagues, the panelists. My name is Opali, and I come from Namibia. I'm quite interested in the discussion of boys and girls' success rates. And I would like them to extend their research to Southern Africa. And in Southern Africa, 2 countries which I know very well, Namibia and Botswana. In those 2 countries, there are more girls in secondary school and university than boys. At university level, girls work harder, and those who get vice chancellor's prizes, first prizes, and medals are largely girls. So you might like to come to Namibia, to Botswana, and change your picture.
Okay. Thank you. So just in closing, do we have any thoughts on how we can involve governments in kind of scaling up some of the initiatives that we've been talking about? And I think this links to kind of the policy environment, and Dr. Pedro mentioned that at the beginning, actually, the need for education to work within a whole gamut of policies. So perhaps you'd just like to share a couple of words.
Yes, absolutely. Just one idea, to be very quick and leave the room to others. I mean, first, I'll be in Namibia in 2 weeks, so that will be nice. Now, secondly, and seriously speaking, I mean, yes, we have been reminded many times these 2 days that there are still 61 million out of school, but hardly I have heard that we still need 1.7 million teachers, you know. And that's certainly an area, I mean, maybe it's not for this panel, not at this time of the day, but certainly we need to talk a lot and explore in which ways we can attract the best qualified people, you know, to the teaching profession. Because, as I said, our latest report, the GMR 2012, shows that we are still in need of 1.7 million teachers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, it's a very good observation. I think I am reaffirming from our own kind of context and perspective the leadership with the government. And we definitely want the government to do the job. And we have to understand, there are situations when government does not have the appropriate and adequate institutional capacity to deliver to every single household. So these are the provisional kind of situation when civil society and NGOs are coming forward to support the government. After all, this is the national cause that we all have to participate in doing the work. So definitely, we are not, we have no intention to replace the government, and it did not be possible like that. So we are with the government, and we work in a national framework where government has its very clear leadership role. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to perhaps just to finish by, in a sense, turning your question back on you and saying that many of the colleagues here will be working in advocacy roles with governments to try and persuade governments to take on some dimensions of these projects, but I think probably that's a role for everybody who's here, actually. One of the joys of being at this conference is to be able to engage in conversations with a wide range of people and to find out about projects that are happening in very different parts of the world, and to take back ideas and then to be using the avenues, the channels that we have in order to be able to talking to relevant governments or government agencies in our own countries. So perhaps I could leave you with a thought that perhaps you could take away something from the discussion today, whether it's about kind of uses of technology, or whether it's about gender inequalities, or it's about kind of starting very much in rural areas with the resources that are there, and think about how that might be applied to some of the challenges that you're facing perhaps in your own context or your own work. So finish by saying thank you very much to the panel, and thank you to the audience for joining in. Thank you. Thanks.